My friends and I grew up in a small town nestled against the edge of a sprawling national forest. It was just a 10-minute bike ride from my house, and during the long summer days, we often found ourselves roaming the woods, exploring the many trails and hidden spots. In our sleepy little town, where nothing exciting ever happened, the forest became our playground, a place of adventure and mystery, but we had never dared to venture into its depths after dark. I was 15, and summer break had just begun. One night, to celebrate, my close friend Jason came over for a sleepover. We planned to indulge in video games, energy drinks, and laughter, but fate had other plans. Just past midnight, the power went out, plunging my house into darkness. My dad groaned and stumbled about, attempting to restore the power, but soon he too gave up. A neighborhood-wide outage, it seemed. Jason and I sat in the darkness, momentarily daunted by the silence. I glanced at him, and he looked just as restless. After a few minutes of boredom, he posed a curious question. Have we ever been to the forest at night? I thought about it, realizing it was a weird but valid observation. Despite all our explorations, we had never dared to experience the woods after sunset. With a thrill of adrenaline, we grabbed my empty backpack and stuffed in a couple of flashlights. We hopped on our bikes, riding towards the familiar dirt circle where we usually left them. As we approached, I noticed an old SUV parked further up the road, its lights off and appearing abandoned. A shiver ran down my spine as I wondered what had happened to its occupants, but I brushed it off. This was the woods. We were here for adventure. The moment we stepped into the forest, we switched on our flashlights. The beams sliced through the dense darkness, illuminating the trees like ghostly sentinels. The moonlight outside was bright, but inside the forest, it was as if we had entered another world. The air felt thick with mystery, and I could feel my heart racing as we ventured deeper into the shadows. At first, we were exhilarated by the eerie ambience. We exchanged whispers, our voices swallowed by the vastness of the forest. But as we wandered further, a sense of unease began to creep in. The sounds that once thrilled us now felt unsettling. The crunching of leaves underfoot seemed louder, the rustling of branches sharper, and the once familiar surroundings now felt alien and foreboding. Jason and I walked in silence, the adrenaline rush fading into an unsettling anxiety. We moved cautiously, scanning the trees, straining to hear any sounds. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed from our left, a stick snapping underfoot. Our hearts raced and we turned our flashlights in the direction of the noise. There, about 40 feet away, stood a man. He was older, clad in a black leather jacket, his long hair hidden beneath a cap. His eyes were wide, almost disturbingly so, and for a moment, neither of us could move. Then we noticed the shovel gripped in his hand. My stomach twisted into knots. "Let's go," Jason whispered, his voice a frantic whisper laced with fear. That snapped me back to reality, and without hesitation, we turned and fled, our hearts pounding in our chests. We dimmed our flashlights, covering them with our shirts, desperate to avoid attracting attention. As we retraced our steps, the sounds of the forest seemed to grow louder, more menacing. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves felt amplified, as if the woods themselves were aware of our panic. We hurried back to our bikes, adrenaline surging through us. When we reached the spot where we had left them, I gasped. The old SUV was gone. We jumped on our bikes, pedaling furiously back to my house, fear propelling us forward. The shadows of the trees loomed over us, dark and menacing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It felt like we had narrowly escaped something terrible, but I couldn't articulate it. Once home, we collapsed in a heap, hearts racing, minds swirling. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I wished we had told someone about the man in the woods. But what would we even say? Who would believe us? The whole incident felt surreal, like a bad dream. Yet deep down, I knew we had come perilously close to something dark and dangerous. The forest, once our playground, had turned into a source of fear. The next day, I told Jason we should never go back into those woods. Not at night, not ever again. He agreed, and that was the last time I ever stepped foot into the forest after sundown. The memory of the man with the shovel haunted my thoughts for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that if we had lingered, if we had ventured closer, things could have ended very differently.
I own a cabin in Idaho, right on the western edge of the Rockies. It's just a small place nestled away in the forest by the mountains that I go to a couple of times a year for short getaways. This was in 2019. I had just driven 8 hours north to get to my cabin and arrived around 8 p.m. The last mile was down a dirt road that sometimes grows over, but luckily I made it with no issues. I turned on the generator at the side of the cabin, then hauled my luggage out of the truck and up to the front door, unlocking it and getting inside. It was a little colder inside than I was expecting, and when I turned on the lights, I saw why. One of the windows in the back of the living room was broken. The whole glass part was shattered and all over the floor. I was obviously really concerned, so I did a quick walkthrough of the house. Everything was in place, nothing was gone, and there were no signs that I could see of anyone having been inside. So I figured it had to have been an animal, maybe even a curious grizzly, seeing as everything else was still in working order. I didn't worry too much about it and continued unloading my luggage. It was too late to run back into town to grab a replacement window, so I just nailed a throw blanket over the open window. I went back outside one more time to get some firewood, threw it in the fireplace, and got the cabin nice and warm. I laid on the couch and opened a book, settling in for the night. With the broken window, I could hear the nature sounds from outside, and it was really peaceful. It didn't take long for me to get sleepy. It was probably 11 when I got up and refilled the wood so it would keep the place warm throughout the night, then shut everything off and went to the bedroom. I set an alarm for 7 a.m. and drifted asleep. In the middle of the night, my body jolted awake and I instantly sat up. I looked over at my nightstand. It was 1:24 a.m. My heart was pounding, and it felt like I'd woken up from something sudden. At this point, I didn't know if it was just a bad dream I had or something else. I was honestly really confused. The cabin was very quiet. All I could hear was the soft crackling of the firewood in the living room. I got up from the bed and walked over to the door, carefully opening it and looking out. The red glow of the fireplace illuminated the cabin enough for me to walk through the short hallway. The first thing I saw was that the blanket had fallen from the broken window. Then, I saw muddy boot prints on the blanket. I followed the tracks with my eyes, going straight from the window and into the hallway. I was standing there, and my heart continued pacing as I turned around and saw the prints going up to the bedroom door I had just come from. I walked back toward the room and felt the absolute horror set in as the boot prints went into the room and up to my bed. My mind was racing now. And I didn't know if this person had just come in and left for no reason or what the hell was going on. But after a closer look, there were no boot prints leading away from the bed. My body felt numb for a moment, as I almost uncontrollably knelt down and looked under the bed. Before I even fully bent down, I saw the outline of someone's hand. I immediately jumped back up. I was so terrified, I slammed my shoulder into the doorway, trying to get out of there. Frantically, I grabbed my car keys and bolted out the door. In the rush, I never got my phone, so I had to drive all the way into town to the police station. We didn't get back to the cabin until an hour after the incident, and whoever had broken in was gone. I still don't know what the hell really happened that night. I think I must have woken up from them crawling underneath my bed and probably bumping into something, but why they were there to begin with, or even why they broke in, I have no clue. This was 5 years ago, and after 2 years of being too afraid to go back to the cabin, I thought about selling it. However, I couldn't have it on my conscience if something were to happen to whoever bought it, so I took the listing down. The cabin has been abandoned for the past 5 years, though I'm almost certain that during that time it's had some unwelcome visitors. Back in 2021, I took a road trip to Maine. I'd never been there before, but I had a few camping trails that I wanted to explore. I actually didn't even have a hotel booked. I pretty much just drove straight up and parked at the trailhead, planning to spend the whole time camping. This was a really flawed plan though, because I arrived a lot later than I had aimed for. It was about 5 p.m., and the trail to the campground was marked as a 4-hour hike. I brought a headlamp and everything, so I wasn't too worried, but it would have definitely been nice not to feel rushed. It's also worth mentioning that no other cars were at the trailhead, so the place was supposedly empty. I set off, walking as fast as I could without injuring myself. 2 hours in, the sun started coming down, and by 8, it had mostly set. I took a 5-minute break to rest up before making the final stretch. I sat on a fallen tree just off the path and drank some water, then pulled out my headlamp. As I did, I heard some leaves crunching behind me. I quickly turned on my light and shone it behind me. But there was nothing, at least nothing within the range of my beam. As I looked out for a few seconds, the sound stopped, and it was just quiet. What I had heard sounded like footsteps, but I didn't hear enough to identify what it was. Probably just a deer or something, I thought. I got up, adjusted the headlamp to my liking, and continued down the trail. Several times throughout the walk, I had to stop, thinking I heard footsteps again. Every time, I would look out and wait, but wouldn't hear anything. I wondered if I was going crazy, or maybe being stalked by an animal. It definitely wasn't a good feeling given my situation. When I reached the 4-hour mark, I started getting uneasy. I thought I'd be at the campground by now, and I didn't know how much battery was left on my headlamp, but it had to be getting low. Then, as I continued to walk anxiously through the woods, I heard it again. This time, it was much closer and sounded exactly like a human footstep. I was almost 100% sure that's what it was, enough to make me jump and turn abruptly, but no one was there. There were so many trees and bushes, and with my tiny headlamp, it felt like I really couldn't see anything. Hello? Is someone out there? The insects chirping only seemed to get louder, covering any subtle sounds of possible movement. I started backing up, still facing where I'd heard the sound from. After taking 10 or so steps back, there was a quiet footstep a little to the right. I moved the light over, and as soon as I did, one of the bushes suddenly jerked, rattling all the leaves, and for an instant, I saw someone's leg as they sprinted away further into the woods. I completely froze up. After a few long seconds though, I came back to myself and started hurrying away from that area. I found a spot a mile up the trail where I could hide out and discreetly camp for the night. I didn't get much sleep, but I never heard or saw the person again. It was pretty clear that they were stalking me, and I wasn't trying to get any deeper into the forest. In the morning, I headed back to my car. As far as I know, they lost track of me. Whatever their intentions were, it couldn't have been good. I bet if I'd made it to the campground, they either would have been waiting for me, or would have arrived later in the night to do whatever the hell they had planned.